fight over Jerusalem in the medieval world. Play your cards right, gain allies at the right time to win the Crusades in Lords of Heaven.
And today we'll be teaching you how to play Lords of Heaven, game designed by Alexander Jagodzinski and published by Phalanx. We are using a prototype copy of the game, so the rules and components may not be final.
And hello everyone, it's Stella.
And Tarrant.
Alright, let's get to the game.
In Lords of Heaven, it's the First Crusade, as the major Christian and Muslim powers battle over supremacy of the Middle East. Through tactical card play to drive their actions, players will spread their influence and support, build, and battle. There will be complex politics and shifting allegiances, as the battle is its own reward. Players gaining points for both being involved in and winning the battles. The game plays over 2 crusades of 6 to 8 rounds each, with points at the end of each crusade for control of cities, and whoever scores the most points will be the winner. I'll take you through the game's 4-player setup and rules first. Most of the rules are the same at 2 or 3 players, but there are some clear differences in setup and a couple of little things you'll need to know. To start, lay out all of the regions in their matching slots, except for Aleppo and Damascus. These will come into play at the midway point of the game. In each case, use the 4-player side of the card, distinguishable by the 3 columns on the left-hand side. This one, for example, has 2 columns. This would be the 2 or 3-player side. Each player chooses a faction. There are 2 Christian factions, the Crusaders and Byzantines, and 2 Muslim factions, the Caliphate and Seljuk, but this is purely thematic. They all play under the same rules. On your player board, place the 3 upgrade cubes in the left column, and place 3 of each building, the churches or mosques and the fortresses in your colour, and the citadels in neutral colour. You'll have 10 double-sided presence tokens. One side shows a crown representing influence, and the other shows support, represented by the flag. You'll be limited to these 10 presents on the map, but you can choose whether you'll take them as influence or support. You'll also have a score marker to place at 0. Each player has asymmetric starting positions for their presence on the board, which is outlined in the rulebook. You'll also place a teal control marker on its appropriate space on the right-hand column of each location. Keep all remaining presents beside your player board. Make general supplies of the gold, faith, and the 3 types of units, footmen, knights, and siege towers, and give each player the asymmetrical starting resources listed in the rulebook for their faction. For example, for the Byzantines, it's 8 gold, 2 faith, and 5 footmen. You should keep your resources hidden behind a player screen. Take the 8 round cards. Stack rounds 1 to 5 in the correct order, then shuffle round X, round Y, and last round together, and place them on the bottom of the overall round stack. This means a crusade will last somewhere between 6 and 8 rounds, but you won't know which round is last until the start of that round when you draw the card. Find and separate the 4 bluff action cards. These are the ones showing faction banners in the top right corners, and then shuffle all of the rest of the action cards and place them in a deck in the bottom right corner of the board. Now conduct the starting action card draft. Deal each player 5 cards, and then you'll look through them and choose one which you wish to keep. You can consider all of the information on the cards, but typically you'll want to choose a card that has one of your icons, or the wild, in the top left corner. Pass the unchosen cards to the player on your left, and you'll receive 4 cards from the player on your right. Do this again until you've drafted your 3rd card, and then discard the other 2. Add your set-aside bluff card to your hand as your starting hand of 4. Choose a first player, and you're now ready to play. Lords of Heaven is played in 2 crusades, with intermediate scoring after the first and final scoring after the second. Each crusade plays in 6 to 8 rounds, and in each round each player will take 1 turn, starting from the first player and going clockwise around the table. To begin a round, first flip a round card. This has no effect other than to tell you when it's the last round of this crusade. Next, on your turn, you must choose one of 4 actions, and you select that action by playing an action card into its column. You can always use any card to take any one of the actions. There is also a 5th option to discard a card for a generic action. The card you play or discard must be a standard action card. You cannot take an action with a bluff. But how you resolve the card and action will vary. If you take one of the left 2 actions, development or presence, play the card bottom up into the column you've chosen. The cost to take the action is what's printed in the bottom right corner of the card, plus in the bottom right corners of any previously played cards this crusade. So taking this presence action would cost me 2 gold. The next player playing a presence action with this card would have to pay 3 gold. In addition to taking the development or presence action, if the card you played matches your faction, then you may take the event effect printed in the middle of the card in either order with the main action. This is where drafting cards which match your faction comes in handy. If, on the other hand, you play movement or income, then you play the card top down. There is no cost to take this action. Instead, there's a benefit. You gain the visible benefits on this card and all previous cards in their top right corners. A card may have 0, 1, or 2 benefits printed on it. If I'd played this card, my benefits would be 2 gold and a footman. However, if a card has one of these longer benefit banners, then the next card played always covers the previous card's lower half. So this card played would result in a benefit of 3 gold. So having played the card, gain the benefit, resolve the income or movement action, but you do not resolve the event on the card, even if it matches your faction. Event benefits are gained only from one of the 2 bottom-up action columns. Upon finishing your turn, you always redraw to a total of 4 cards in hand, including your bluff. If there were any other players who played cards during your turn, they also redraw to finish your turn. So now we'll talk about each of the 4 actions. First, we'll talk about presence. The presence action is how you get your presence tokens on the board or improve their positions. To understand this, we first need to take a look at the locations and presence tokens in more detail. Each location card is split into 2 halves. On the right-hand side is the region, and this is where you'll place support. Any number of support tokens can occupy a region. On the left-hand side is the city, and the city is subdivided further into 3 columns. These columns are where you'll place your influence represented by the crowns. A player cannot have more than 1 influence per city, and each column in a city cannot have more than 1 influence in it. When someone adds influence to an occupied column, it will push all other influence down. These represent the player's relative political influence within the city, and if you place your influence in the rightmost column, then you claim the control marker. This is worth 1 point at the end of each crusade. If another player ever takes over control of a city, then the control marker also changes hands. So, with that background, there are 3 different things you can do during a presence action, and you may do each as many times as you want, as long as you can afford it. You can add a support to a region at a cost of 1 gold, as long as you have influence in the adjoining city. This can be influence in any column, but players with no influence are not allowed to place support there. Secondly, you can place a new influence into a city as long as, along one of these paths, you had influence in an adjacent city at the start of this turn. For example, blue couldn't place influence here and then here as part of the same action. When placing new influence, choose any one of the columns, pay the cost at the top of that column, and then add your influence, pushing other influence down or off the city and back to their owner if applicable. Third, you can choose to upgrade the position of your influence within a city where you already have it. To do this, pay the cost difference between your current column and the column you're choosing to go to, and take control or shuffle down influence again as appropriate. The second action we'll talk about is development. When you develop, you construct any one building and you upgrade any one building on your player board. These do not have to be the same building type. This action has no additional cost above what's printed in the bottoms of the cards. A church or mosque is built where you have support in an empty region slot. A citadel can be placed where you have influence, specifically in the control column of a city. Blue can build a citadel here, red cannot. You'll also notice that this covers up the cost of that column, and it means that other players are no longer allowed to take over control by paying for it using the presence action. Finally, fortresses are placed on these spaces between locations, and you can place yours in a space adjacent to any location where you have either a support or an influence. These spaces are all valid for blue. A fortress must be between two locations, so before Aleppo and Damascus come onto the board, their adjacent fortress spaces aren't yet available. Placing and upgrading buildings come with a number of benefits, none of which are immediate, but all of which we'll see in the next actions. The third action we'll talk about is income. This action is all about gaining resources and units. After gaining the benefit on the cards you played, you gain the benefits shown under your church or mosque upgrade token for each church or mosque you have. So in this case, with 2 churches, I get 2 faith and 2 gold. You gain the gold income printed at the bottom of every column where you have an influence on the board. And finally, you gain 2 additional income, which you can take in any combination of gold, faith, footmen, which are worth 1, and siege towers, which are worth 2. Here, for example, I might choose to take it as a footman and a faith. The last action we'll talk about is movement, and it's movement which can trigger conflict. Movement allows you to move your support flags from region to region along these lines around the map. You can move as many or as few support as you want, even none, and you can move each token multiple times. However, each time you take 1 or more tokens from a single region and move it to an adjacent one, it costs you 1 gold. So as an example turn, I could move that support for 1 gold and then move both of these in a group to Tripoli for a 2nd gold. Additionally, every fortress you have on the board when you take the movement action gives you 1 recruitment point, which you immediately spend gaining units to your supply. A footman costs 1 recruitment point, a siege tower costs 2, and a knight costs 3. Once you've finished moving, you may initiate a conflict in any valid region on the board. In the first crusade, you can initiate 1 conflict per turn. In the second crusade, you can initiate 2. There are 2 different types of conflicts, which work mostly the same but have a few subtle differences. There are battles. These occur in the regions and represent support versus support. And there's siege. This takes place at the city and represents support in the adjoining region fighting against whoever has the highest influence within that city. First, we'll talk about battle. Suppose it's the red player's turn. Red initiates the battle by choosing any one other player who has support in that region to attack. Suppose here red is the attacker and green is the defender. Step 1 is the attacker moves support. The attacker may move at most 1 of their own support from each adjacent location into the attack location at a cost of 1 gold each. Second, red may ask any of the non-defenders, so in this case blue or yellow, to be an ally. You don't have to ask the player of the same religion. Anyone is valid to be an ally. Suppose blue agrees. The next step is blue may optionally move up to 1 support from each adjacent location into the battle as well. This costs 1 gold per support, and for the purpose of fortresses counts as a move action, meaning that here blue can spend a recruitment point. Next, it's the defender's turn to perform those same 3 steps. Firstly, moving up to 1 support to the battle from each adjacent region, paying 1 gold each, and triggering fortresses as if it were a move. Then asking for an ally, and that ally having the chance to move support into the battle. Let's suppose here that yellow declines. That means this will be a battle between red and blue, and green. Both attacker and defender must choose 1 action card from hand to play face down into the battle. When this is later revealed, it'll be the brown box in the bottom left corner which is resolved. It's during this step that you can play your bluff card if you don't want to play an action card. Next, all players including allies may commit units to the battle. Count your number of support in the battle. The maximum number of units you can commit is 2 per support. So in this case it would be 6 for red. In a battle, which is colour-coded orange, you can use only footmen or knights, which are also orange. Siege towers can only be used in siege conflicts. Simultaneously and behind their screens, players choose the units that they'll commit by hiding them in hand, and may also commit any number of faith. Simultaneously, all players reveal their commitments and the cards. Next, roll dice. Each player rolls 1 die per support in the battle. For each church or mosque you have on the board, you may take 1 reroll of a single die. Now add up total sword icons on each side of the battle to determine the winner. Here the red and blue side has 2 from dice, 9 from units, 2 from faith, and 2 from the played card, a total of 15. Green has 1 from the dice, 6 from units, 3 from faith, and has a fortress adjacent to the combat location, which contributes swords according to the value of this upgrade, so in this case 3. The total is 13, so this side wins 15-13. If there's a tie, that tie goes to the defender. Gain points for the battle. The winner gains 3 points, the ally of the winner, if any, gains 2, and anyone who lost the battle gains 1. If you didn't fight, you gain nothing. Next, distribute wounds for each wound symbol rolled. Here, the green side would have to suffer 5 wounds, and the red and blue side would suffer 2. Each wound kills 1 unit, and you can distribute that however you want between allies, with the deciding vote going to the main attacker or defender if necessary. If you run out of units to suffer the wounds, then you instead start removing support from the area. If you also run out of those, other wounds are ignored. Resolve post-battle effects on cards if appropriate. Here, red would gain a faith and a gold. Then all faith which was spent in the battle is discarded. This is single use. Then any units which are left alive may be retrieved by their owners at a cost of 1 gold each. So here blue could take this footman back for a gold, while red would need to pay 4 gold to get all of these units back. Red might decide to reduce the amount paid, getting the most important units back and allowing the rest to be discarded. Finally, discard the action cards which were played, except in the case of bluff, which is returned to the player's hand. Whatever happened with the cards, remember that both players will redraw to 4 at the end of this turn. The second type of conflict is siege, and when you siege, you'll be using your support in a region to attack whoever has the highest influence within that region's city. As shown here, green could siege yellow, but yellow could not siege. If blue had control, then either yellow or green could siege blue. Siege differs from battle in that once a siege has been declared, no one can move support into the region to join. Only the support which is already there can get involved. There's also no benefit to having a fortress, but the defender can benefit from having a citadel. So let's suppose that green sieges blue. The first step is that green may ask any player with support in this region to be an ally. So in this case, yellow is the only target. Yellow may accept or decline. Suppose they decline. As long as there are still any unallied players, the defender may now ask for an ally. Again, only players with support in that region are valid targets. Influence doesn't matter, it's only support that can ally. Let's suppose yellow does join forces with blue. The next steps are unchanged. Attacker and defender play cards, and attacker, defender, and allies simultaneously play units and faith. The differences here are that players can play footmen and siege towers instead of footmen and knights, and players are now limited to playing 2 units per support plus 1 unit per influence if they are on the besieged defender's side. Additionally, the main defender may play 1 unit and will gain this amount of bonus swords for each citadel they've cleared off their player board. Here the citadel bonus is +2. The dice are rolled and re-rolled for churches and mosques, and the swords are added up. With the bonus on here, the attacker has 8, and with the 2 from the citadel bonus, the defender has 12. This time, all players in the battle gain 1 point, regardless of whether they won or lost. If the defender won and the defender already had the city's control marker, then that player gains an extra point. If the defender won but didn't already have control, then advance the defender's influence marker 1 step to the right in that city for free. If the attacker wins, then the attacker has 2 choices. The first is to take over the defender's position in the city, returning their influence to them and replacing it with their own. Or the player can burn the city down, destroying the citadel and removing any influence, and gaining the amount of gold printed here. Whichever option you take, winning a siege is the only way to get someone out of the control position once there's a citadel present. And so those are the 4 different actions that you can take. There is one final option on your turn, which is if you don't want to take one of these actions, you can discard any action card from your hand to gain 5 coins worth of resources and units in any combination. When you see this card, you are commencing the last round of this crusade. If it's the end of the first crusade, each player now gains 1 point for each city they control. In other words, count up the number of control markers you have and gain 1 point for each. Then add the empty Aleppo and Damascus locations to the board and seed them with their control tokens. Discard all action cards from the board, and each player can refresh their hand by drawing 2 action cards and then discarding any 2 from their hand. You'll now proceed to the second crusade, with each player allowed to take 2 conflicts per movement action instead of 1. After the second crusade is finished, the game is over. Each player once again gains 1 point for each control marker held. You then also gain 1 point for each row of 3 buildings which you've completely emptied onto the board, and 1 point for each marked upgrade which you've upgraded into. The player with the highest score wins, and if tied, whoever controls Jerusalem breaks the tie. The 2 and 3 player modes of the game play under the same rules, with one key difference, that each of the cities has only 2 columns instead of 3. All of the changes occur during setup. In the 3-player game, you'll just place the pieces the same way you would have in the 2-player game, simply leaving out the pieces you would have normally placed for the 4th player's faction. Unlike the 4-player game, some players will begin in control of cities. In the 2-player game, you must set up with one player as a Christian faction and the other as a Muslim faction. In this case, some presence pieces from the 4-player setup change colours to the other colour of the same religion, and each player begins with a lot more of their overall presence on the board. In both 3 and 2 players, remove any cards which are only for factions not in the game, and naturally at 2 players you won't be able to form alliances during battle. Otherwise, all rules remain the same. And that's how to play Lords of Heaven.
Check out the project page of Lords of Heaven. We'll put the link in the description below so you can check it out. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a great day. See you next time.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching another video on the Dice Tower. Hey, do you want to know what's going on with Dice Tower? Do you want to know about our events, our cruises, special things that we're going to do live here in the Dice Tower, subscribe to Dice Tower Digest. Go to dicetowerdigest.com. It's a newsletter that we send out bi-weekly. We won't use your email for anything else. This is just to get you some information about the Dice Tower so you'll be up to date. Thanks for watching.